And after a while, there's nothing you can't handle. You can handle all the ups and downs of life with these wonderful release tools.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Food Matters podcast, your home for nutrition, health, and wellness education. My name is Laurentine. I am a filmmaker and a nutritionist and the founder of foodmatters.com, and I'm here to hold your hand on this journey to optimum health, transformation, and emotional healing. Hello again, Food Matters community, and welcome to another Food Matters podcast. I am so excited to be joined today by Dawson Church, and you may recognize him from the Transcendence series, the docu-series that we did a couple of years ago, and that is now available on Gaia and Food Matters. But what Dawson and I today will be delving deeper into is how our thoughts and emotions can impact our life, both positively and negatively, and how we can use EFT tapping to help shift these emotions and beliefs. So welcome, still Dawson. I love this conversation. So let's just start from the basics. When we have on a biological level, when we have a thought or a belief, how does this emotion manifest in the body?
It's astonishing how quickly and pervasively the effects of thought and belief and emotion are in the body. And it's the simplest example I often use is when you say, for example, have something stressful happen that will often happen. People say you were driving and you'll have an experience when you're driving your car, and maybe you'll have a near miss on another car. And so your experience of that event, of that minor issue, that minor stress in the outside world, is translated by your body into chemicals, into molecules, stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And the genes that code for these chemicals produce those neurochemicals really, really quickly. Like there's a gene called CYP11B1, and it codes for cortisol. And that gene turns on in a couple of seconds. Same thing for adrenaline. And so those external problems we have are triggering the stress response. What most people don't realize is that when you think about that, say that night you're telling your children about the near miss of that other vehicle when you were on the highway, and you're really recalling all those emotions of feeling stress again, your body can't tell the difference between the actual problem, actual stressor, and the vivid emotion that you're pulling up now as you explain that to your friend or your family member. And so that same gene, CYP11B1, is triggered, and it now is making cortisol and adrenaline and driving your stress level high, which is fine if we're doing it a few times a month, a few times a year when there's a real threat. The trouble is most of us are thinking negative thoughts. Many of us are consumed by negative thoughts. We're worried about our bodies. We're worried about food and water. We're worried about security. We're worried about the news. We're worried about our families, worried about our jobs. And so all of those negative thoughts are triggering that gene expression over and over and over again. And if that's not bad enough, it's also cannibalizing really life-affirming molecules like DHEA, which we need to stay healthy and which our cells need to communicate with each other. So what happens is in people who are stressed is it literally cannibalizes, all that cortisol cannibalizes the production of DHEA. We both drop our good hormones like DHEA and raise our stress hormones like cortisol at the same time by thought alone. So we're doing this over and over and over again with hundreds of thousands of molecules every day. And when you do anything to de-stress, when you tap, do EFT, when you meditate, when you do deep breathing, when you reflect on really positive information, all of these things are able to shift those molecules in your body. And the result is optimists, for example, have lifespans that are 10 years longer than pessimists. So that's the benefit, is improved health in the short term, greater longevity in the long term.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So there is help for people that, for example, have gone through a traumatic car accident or a traumatic loss of a loved one or something that has affected them deep, deep, deep down. And, it could easily turn into deep depression, or it can turn into, years of sorrow or grief, or, perhaps even suicide. So if you could explain the pathways of how this type of tapping or EFT can bypass that neuro pathway, so to
Yeah,
speak.
so we're meant to be stressed and grieving under particular circumstances. Like if you're grieving for a while when you lose a loved one, that's perfectly normal. But one woman walked into my one of my live workshops and she said, I'm here because I need to release my grief for my husband's death. And I said, well, we'll do some tapping. And again, tapping is very simple. It's just pressure, like I'm doing right now on acupuncture points. We just tap or rub on those points. And this is rubbing right now. I'm rubbing right below my collarbones on a point called K27, the 27th point on the kidney meridian. And so we know from research that this produces a rapid shift of the stress response in the body and in the brain. And so I asked her, I said, we'll explore that in the workshop. I asked her a question. I said, how long ago did your husband die? She said, 15 years ago. Now, when I heard her say 15 years ago, I knew right away that it wasn't her husband's death that was the triggering root cause of her 15 years of grief. It was something much older. It was probably dated back to when she was 2 or 3 or 5 years old, maybe even in the womb, because there's ways in which womb trauma affects us as well. Prenatal, preverbal trauma affects us, and if we don't heal and process those early life traumas, they accumulate. We then have the tragedy as an adult. We lose our spouse, we lose our job, we lose our house, we have a financial problem, we have a medical problem, and it triggers traumatic stress because we haven't gone and cleared the emotion of those early experiences. So you want to do that. You want to proactively go and clear your past, clear your childhood, so that when you have things happen in the present, that you can process them quickly. So if that grief lasts for 6 months or a year, that's understandable. 5 years, maybe longer, means probably you have unhealed things from the past. So there are ways to use EFT, one of which is to clear things that are happening right now. If you have a disappointment, if you have a life issue at the moment, you go and work to clear it. But you can also go and clear things in the past. Like I remember one woman I was working with, and she stands out in my mind because she was the chief psychiatrist at a big hospital system. And she was at a medical conference I was speaking at, and she had had this memory, a really emotionally impactful memory, embedded for most of her life. And it was like one of the most nightmare experiences of her life. And she remembered that her parents had separated fairly early in her life, and her older sister and she was about 7 years old when this happened. Her sister was a few years older, and they were living with their mom, and their dad was elsewhere. And they were living in the home of her mother's boyfriend. So the four of them were there, the older sister, her mom, and the boyfriend. And on that night that she told me about, the father literally smashed down the back door of the house, stormed into the boyfriend's house, smashed the boyfriend, punched him in the nose, punched him in the face. There was blood everywhere, grabbed the two girls under his arms, dragged them outside into his pickup truck, and drove away. And they were then with their father for a period of time before their mother got them back again. So this tragic event. Remember, she remembered just being torn away from her mother, the safety and security of her mother by this angry man who was her father, and all the trauma of that event. And we tapped on that. We tapped on it piece by piece. We scored her emotions. She was a 10 out of 10 to begin with. 10 out of 10 for the blood, 10 out of 10 for the screaming, 10 out of 10 for the feeling of being held and restrained by her father, being unable to get free. And we tapped all of those things down to a zero. And When we did that, I had her tell the story one more time. And she was doing this in front of a big audience of people at this medical conference. And so a lot of people were witnessing this whole demonstration of the power of tapping to release emotion. And she got to the end of the story, and her eyes suddenly opened wide, and she gasped. And she said, "Oh my goodness, I just remembered something I had completely forgotten. My mother's boyfriend was molesting my older sister, and my father burst in there to save us from him." And so suddenly her entire life is changed.
Wow.
And her old story that she had been victimized by her father, who was this violent man who'd come in and removed her from her mother, she realized he'd gone in there to save the two girls and get them out of an abusive situation. So people have these remarkable changes. Often it just shakes their whole worldview. The person who has been in that car accident suddenly says, I realize now I learned so much from that. I've even had cancer patients tell me, we just finished a big clinical trial of EFT at Tel Aviv University Hospital, or a clinic near Tel Aviv University in association with Tel Aviv University Hospital. And in the study, we find that people are now saying, I got cancer and it woke me up. So people are able to revision their past in very, very powerful ways when they do that. They start to find their joy again. And that's so wonderful when you find someone who's smiling and laughing and realizing, hey, that tragedy, it actually set me up to really progress and move forward in my life.
Wow, I love these type of stories, and thank you so much for going into detail for all those that are listening. And it's also interesting, I'm just going to combine those stories and put it in context of what I'm feeling here. I live in Sydney, and we come across a lot of single mothers here. And I hear some stories, at the kids' school, where I hear the mothers talk, and then they talk about different type of relationships that they've had with their ex-partners, and they throw around these words like the narcissistic abusers and these, be the borderline personality disorders. And we as a culture, we like to tend to give labels to people, right? And this was that, and this was that. But yet I feel that a lot of these women, they call themselves abuse survivors, and they're going through the grief still of those steps that they needed to take to go away from that. And maybe you can explain as well, for those people that are going through this type of, where they've had a relationship breakdown, or they've had this type of abuse in their body, and they are still needing to heal from that. What sort of advice would you give to these type of women on how to get over that more quickly?
Well, one of really persistent problems we have as human beings is we repeat our patterns of suffering. And Melody Beatty tells a story. She wrote the book Codependent No More. And that book's been around for 40 years, and it's still really powerful to look at how you're codependent. And she says, in one of her interviews, she said that she ran into a friend of hers, and she said, are you still with the same guy you were with before? And the friend said, yeah, I'm still with him. Different man, same guy. And her friend realized, I'm just repeating the same patterns. I'm picking the same people over and over and over again. And I hate to admit this, but I did the same thing for decades. I picked exciting women, and they were exciting, but they also, the last relationship I had before I got married to my wife, who thankfully I've been married to for a long time now. But the woman was abusive and threw things at me and screamed and yelled a lot. But why did I pick her? Because I picked another person like her before, and because that's the modeling I got when I was young. I saw women often being really abusive to men in their lives, and so I tended to pick abusive women. When I was just repeating back the modeling I'd seen when I was a kid. And bear in mind that these neural pathways that are forming when you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, they aren't episodic memories the way you and I think of memory as adults. They are neurological structures hardwired into the brain's memory and learning centers, the hippocampus and the amygdala and the thymus and all of these, the thalamus, all of these structures in the midbrain, they're being hardwired into these structures. And that's the only neurological template we have for what a relationship looks like. So you had an exciting mother, you go find an exciting person to be with. You had an exciting father who was out of control, you go find an out of control man to be with now. You dump the guy, and then you find another guy just like him. And so we tend to repeat these patterns. How do we break those patterns in our lives? And there are a lot of things we can do that break it. And if there are many people listening are probably coaches or therapists, you'll know that you work with your clients and you have the best skills and tools, and they have the best intentions, and they just keep repeating the same stuff over and over and over again because it's hard to change once your brain has been neurologically wired that way. So what you need is a pattern interrupt. And when you feel the urge, like I was one woman I knew who just picked abuse of men, and I she was part of a dance club I was with. So for a few years, I hung out with her and various other people in this dance club. And then one day we were going to a dance in a bus, and there were a bunch of us in the bus, and I sat next to her new boyfriend, and he was different from all the rest. He was responsible. I really got to like him on the course of this long bus ride. And afterwards, I walked up to her at the dance and I said to her, Kimberly, I'm so thrilled you're with this new guy, Pete. He's fabulous. She said, he's boring. Why? Because he's not producing any cortisol, is not turning on her CYP11B1 gene and creating drama in her life. So she did dump him. And the next dance I saw her at, she was with another guy who was chaotic and just, full of all the same stuff. So we repeat these patterns. If you're a therapist, if you're a coach, you watch your clients repeating this. So how do you interrupt those patterns? There are ways of doing it. Energy therapies are fabulous. In my books, I talk about EFT, talk about meditation, about energy medicine. There are all kinds of ways of changing the energy. And, you, after a while, are changing yourself. You're focused on self-change. When you do that, you start to find that the people you attract are different. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, one of my favorite sutras in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is where he says, the fruits of self-study are. Now, this is a real zinger. I never thought he'd say this, but he says the fruits of self-study are the company of radiant beings. And that is a very interesting sequel to self-study, self-development, and moving in a new direction in your life. You start to attract very different people into your life. You have wonderful people like my wife, Christine. People meet her and they just love her right away because she's such a warm, heartful, peaceful, kind, compassionate human being. And so you begin to attract different people into your life as friends, as your spiritual circle, as your partners. And so you've worked on yourself. The fruits of all that self-development is you start to attract people who are like the new you. So do the pattern interrupt. When you feel yourself moving in those old patterns, do some tapping, do some deep breathing, do some grounding, do some meditation, and then you can make a different choice.
Beautiful. So when we talk about pattern interrupt, I think everybody's probably going, okay, well, how do you do this pattern interrupt? Is it a specific tapping script, or is it something that we say to ourselves like an affirmation, or what may this look like?
There are a whole group of ways to do it. And at the end of each chapter, like I have two books which are important. One is called Bliss Brain, one is called Mind to Matter. And at the end of each chapter of each book, I give you a list of things you can do and recommendations for further work. And there are a lot of different ways you can do pattern interrupts, and that you have to find one that works for you. A few of the most common ones, though, I cover a bunch of evidence-based ones in those two books. One of them is grounding. If you are ungrounded, you are more liable to make poor decisions. And grounding is simply standing barefoot on the earth, on wet ground, on damp or wet grass or dirt. So that's grounding is one evidence-based way of doing a pattern interrupt. Another is breathing. Benjamin Franklin, 250 years ago, one of the founding fathers of the US, Benjamin Franklin, said, if you are upset, before you say a single word, take 10 deep breaths. If you are very upset, take 100. So that's a good pattern to interrupt. Take some deep breaths, become conscious, become mindful of your breathing. Breathe deliberately. I share in my eco meditation method that heart breathing is going to put you into heart coherence. And again, you have a big redistribution then of blood from your muscles, your peripheral muscles in fight and flight, back into your brain so you can think. Because when you're in fight or flight, your capillaries in your brain get very small and drain blood out of your frontal lobes into your peripheral muscles, and you can't think very well. So that's one way. Breathing is a powerful way of interrupting your patterns. Tap. My wife and I have an ironclad rule in our relationship. If there is any emotional tension or content in a topic we're discussing, tap first and then talk. Do not open your mouth and start blabbing unless you are tapping first. Blab after tapping. Do not blab without
Oh
tapping.
no. I
We
remember
always do
James tried that to me once when I was very angry, and I just got even more angry. And I'm like, you just there's no way I'm gonna tap this out. Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
you just have to release your anger, but you're right. Maybe it's better to tap and breathe first.
Oh, you can tap, and then while you're tapping, you can release your anger because then you're having a true catharsis. And in energy terms, you're releasing your anger. Researchers, in fact, there's a study was published, let's see, about 2 months ago. Really interesting study that looked at a question that has bothered people in psychology for at least 50 years. And I know when I was studying psychology in the 70s, one of the big questions was, is it better to release your anger, let it all out, let out the tension, or is it better to not let it out and find other ways of dealing with it other than emotional expression? And this question has been really unresolved in psychology for decades. And the research came in, it was really interesting. People who were just letting it out actually had worse medical outcomes and higher anger levels over time than the people who processed it in various ways. And they processed it in ways like meditation and walking and all kinds of ways of processing anger. So if you start tapping, you might be furious. But if you're tapping, I'm tapping on kidney meridian now, this is spleen meridian. You can tap on your central meridian, your governing meridian, stomach meridian, tap, and then you're actually letting that energy go. And also you can do it unobtrusively. One guy I worked with was really mad at his brother. And I was working in a big auditorium with a lot of people in the audience, and he didn't want to stand there in front of the audience and tap on his brother and scream and yell, which I was encouraging him to do. I had him turn toward the wall. And that was much safer for him not to be expressing it to other people. He just turned toward the wall, did the tapping, tapped on all the points, and screamed and yelled at his brother and let it all go. So that's
Wow.
truly, that's a catharsis, not holding it all inside. So all of us is really processing the anger, not letting not firing those circuits in your brain and making them bigger, which you do when you express it without catharsis.
And when we're breaking these patterns in breathing or tapping or releasing or shaking or any type of this type of work that you're describing, is there something that we visualize in our mind while we're doing that? Is there something of like, because I'm a big visualizer, and I sometimes find when we're breathing, we need to do something also with our mind to occupy our I guess our third eye, right? Is there something
Our
that you do?
thoughts. Yeah, and paradoxically, when I'm having people process like that, I will have them amp up the anger, to rage or outrage, or if it's shame, I'll focus them on the shame and get them even more shamed. And it's a very paradoxical approach. I've done this again at many medical conferences, and often the doctors and nurses and psychotherapists and other people who are watching me are really puzzled by it. It's like, in fact, that woman who I mentioned earlier was the chief of psychiatry at a big hospital. Um, I was having her process all the stuff around her dad, and she eventually got down to a zero on most of it. But I then had her find other details of the scene and focus on them and brought her number up. again, now the audience I could tell was very uneasy about that because it's like,
Yeah,
oh,
that would be quite painful to feel and experience those feelings again and again and again.
yeah. And yet with EFT, we know from a lot of research that it's what the person has just discovered is that it's safe to process. They made this major breakthrough that if I face my worst fears and face the worst events in my life and I'm tapping, I'm releasing them. Now I can go back. So we worked with over 20,000 veterans with PTSD in our nonprofit, and we found that initially the last thing they want to do is go back and think about Vietnam or about Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever they were. So they don't want to go there. But once they've tapped on one event and gone down to a zero, then they'll go to another event and another event. They gain confidence. And after a while, there's nothing you can't handle. You can handle all the ups and downs of life with these wonderful release tools.
Wow. Wow, that's so beautiful. And so, okay, let's talk about food and matters and food matters and all the ways that we can process things that are sometimes a little bit sticky, right? So when we have this thing that we like to do, which is eating, and we go a little bit overboard and we start to develop addictions or we start to develop cravings and sugar cravings and ways that we, start to want to create more abundance and fill up this emptiness inside. How can we look at that and go, how can we use tapping and to just sort of use those good emotions and sort of cut those patterns and create a new belief system for that?
Yeah, there are many clinical trials of EFT for weight loss, and they show, generally speaking, that people will do a weight loss program, and its focus is often breaking. Like we have one called Naturally Thin You, and I focused for the first 2 weeks only on one thing, tapping for breaking your addiction to sugar and wheat. If we can just break people's addiction to those two things, then I feel they've got their $300 or whatever the program costs. So just those two things are so crucial that we focus on that may sound so basic and so rudimentary. Why aren't we focusing on a balanced diet and supplements and all these other things? Because those two things, if you've got those two things going, and you may have the most wonderful nutritional program in the world, but if you've got your sugar and wheat cravings, it's going to undermine everything else you do. So generally speaking, we have people focus on those things early on, and all you do is you just look at them and tap, pick them up, pick up that spoon of sugar or that candy bar, and you just tap. And it's amazing what happens. When I do live workshops, I do a lot of them online nowadays. Post COVID, most of our workshops are online, but I still do a few in person every year. And on day 2 of our 5-day workshop, we bring out candy the second day, and we pass chocolate around the room, and we say to people, "Don't eat it. Don't eat it right now. You can eat it later, but before you eat it, we're going to do a little test and we're going to have you get in touch with how much you crave that chocolate." And usually people are high numbers, the 7, 8, 9, 10, the numbers are way up there. And so they're getting in touch with all their cravings. And I have many videos of this on our YouTube channel as well. So you'll watch a whole group
No.
of people, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, all craving like crazy at that, some of them at that high level of 10 out of 10. And what I know is going to happen, just this happens workshop after workshop for the last 15 years. We're going to do about a 45-minute tapping routine. I'm going to tap on all the components of cravings with them. And after that, I'm going to say, okay, now, everyone, if you want to eat the chocolate, you still can. And what I know after day 2 of the workshop, and I tell my assistants this, I just guarantee this after so many workshops. Everyone's going to hug each other, be chatting, going to dinner after day 2 of the workshop, and they'll leave the room, and we teaching assistants will all be there, and the room will be strewn with uneaten candy. Nobody eats their chocolate after they tap.
Nobody
They just
wanted
lose all
them.
interest. And in fact, many of them go not just to a zero, many of them go to below zero. They say, "This is disgusting. I can smell all the fillers and all the spoiled, oils in this thing and blah. I no,
Rancid
I don't
oils.
have any.
That's so true.
So yeah, so it's really effective. And then just one last thing about it. We at Bond University, we did a wonderful clinical trial with my dear friend and colleague Peter Stapleton, who's head of the Master of Psychology program there. And after we've done many clinical trials showing that people lose weight on EFT, very importantly, they also continue losing weight after they finish Naturally Thin You or one of our other programs. So we track them for a year, sometimes 2 years, and slowly and steadily. In that particular trial, they lost about a pound a month. They lost about 9 kilos in the year after they finished the program. They finished the program now. No one's checking up on them, no mentoring, no coaching, and they're still steadily losing weight because they've lost their cravings. So Peter Stapleton, my friend at Bond University, she did a clinical trial where she randomized people into two groups, and one group was put in MRIs, and then we measured their brain function. And when they were exposed to images in the MRI, they're having these images flash in front of their eyes of cake and chocolate and pasta and bread and all these things. There, what lit up was not the appetite parts of the brain, the emotion parts of the brain. These things did not represent food to them. They represented love and fear. They represented emotion. So we measured their MRI signatures. We then brought them back into the lab a couple of months later after they'd done a program for a couple of months on releasing food cravings, put them back in the MRI, showed them all the same images, no emotional reaction whatsoever. To them, it's just stuff out there. They no longer were projecting their emotions into the food. So it changes the whole way our brain processes the appearance and the smell and the taste of food. And we then have a chance to develop a healthy lifestyle and an appropriate way of eating. So it changes our eating. And I can tell you, this is kind of a running joke, but you start craving green beans and broccoli and sprouts and all these good things. Your body wants these things, and you're in touch with your body then. You aren't worried about your body's cravings. You aren't trying to suppress what your body's telling you. Your body's natural urges to eat healthy just begin to pop out spontaneously once you've tapped away all of those cravings, and especially those two for wheat and sugar.
That is so true. So, what a great study. I love that. I'm going to incorporate that in our newsletter for Food Matters. It's amazing. So, in regards to sleep, sleep is another one that sometimes, we're all like that. We're staying like lying awake like this, eyes open. We don't know what to do. Our mind is going crazy. We know we've only got a couple of more hours of sleep to go, but we know we don't know how to get to sleep. Is there something, a tapping script or something, some sort of affirmations that we can say in your beautiful research and experience to help us fall asleep?
Yeah, so our main sleep research comes from studies of people with PTSD. And there are many clinical trials of people with PTSD. And they do EFT, and they generally have high levels of insomnia. They score the clinical range of the insomnia scale. And so insomnia is a huge problem for people with PTSD, and it affects everything else. If you have insomnia, then it messes with cell metabolism, it messes with your exercise routine, it messes with your mood big time throughout the day. So sleep is the foundation of both mental health and physical health. You have to get that one thing right. And we find in these clinical trials that these people who have PTSD, their scores on that sleep disturbance scale drop way, way, way down into the normal range after they have done EFT. And they do it generally for about 2 months. They have roughly 2 months of treatment, usually once a week. And then after those sessions, they then have an improvement in flashbacks and nightmares, in hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, and their sleep normalizes. Insomnia is a symptom. It isn't a standalone problem. there's a reason why you have insomnia. And it could be something, now, some of it is also going to be organic because there's certain things, if you, obviously, if you're having caffeine afternoon, that's going to trigger insomnia. If you're having alcohol too late in the evening, that's a big dose of sugar. And it won't disrupt alcohol. People will have alcohol before they go to sleep. It'll help them get to sleep. It'll wake them up again around 2 or 3 a.m. So alcohol is a two-edged sword in terms of insomnia. Also, a lot of sleeping aids. Like I'm just helping someone right now who's been using melatonin for many years, and now it's began to really disrupt her sleep rhythms, and she has to wean herself off melatonin for a good night's sleep. So there are all kinds of factors that go into this. Use evidence-based techniques. Meditation is evidence-based. EFT is evidence-based. There are a lot of nostrums and bits of advice out there that aren't science-based. Get the facts. Like we have a little program on our website for insomnia, which I think is like sold for $20 or something like that, because you don't want to get into people's hands who have insomnia, but it really helps them get again by presenting evidence-based tools. But use evidence-based stuff. Don't just listen to rumors and try things. Use evidence-based tools that are really, really good. The few others I'll mention are one is conditioning yourself for sleep in advance. Fill your mind with gratitude, with positive thoughts before you go to sleep. My personal favorite sleep hack, I've been using it for 10, 20 years, is I imagine myself lying down on very soft grass in a huge field in which there are 1,000 Buddhas. The Buddha, Kuan Yin, the female Buddha, male Buddhas, live Buddhas, statues of Buddha. I just lay there on this beautiful bright green grass in this field of Buddhas. I drift to sleep that way. I'll get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I'll be in the field of Buddhas. I'll look around me. Ah, field of Buddhas. Go to the bathroom, come back to the field of Buddhas, wake up in the morning. And so you're conditioning your mind with this wonderful imagery of falling asleep in the field of Buddhas. It's an ancient visualization
Wow.
from Buddhism. So, gratitude, the good things in your day, the good things in your life. We have circuits in our brain, the attention circuit, the emotion regulation circuit, the compassion circuit. You want to awaken these circuits in your brain, be living in joy. The average child laughs, the average toddler, little baby, 3, 4, 5 years old, they laugh an average of 300 times a day. For them, the world is a place of magic and laughter. Adults laugh an average of 20 times a day. We cut our laughter 94% between the ages of 3 and the ages of 30. We need to reclaim our joy, our gratitude, our sense of awe and wonder. All these words are behind me for a reason. I had a graphic artist put all these words behind me: graciousness and determination and dignity and consideration and commitment and creativity and courage. I mean, we fill our minds with these things every day. If that's what we're doing, we're proactively predisposing ourselves to those experiences. So our contents of our minds are under our control. The world out there, not so much. I mean, can I control Ukraine? Can I control Palestine? Can I control Darfur? No, I really can't. I can't even control my wife, children, and grandchildren.
That's
But
a
what
big
goes on
one.
in here, I have control of that, and that's where you begin. So for insomnia, begin there. Fill your mind, your life with positive thoughts, positive feelings, positive emotions, and passionately. In my book, Bliss Brain, I talk about things that affect us. Believe those things and fill your mind with those things, not just feeling good and a moderate level of feeling good. Be passionate about your life and about the good things in your life. Bring the enthusiasm of that child that laughs 300 times a day to your every single day and see what happens outside of you. It's guaranteed to change your outside world once you've taken responsibility for what happens within your confines of your skull.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. And I think it's really important, these topics that we touched on and our emotional healing and the way that we interact with each other, they're all a product of how we show up in the world, what thoughts we think on a daily basis, what beliefs we have about ourselves. So, yes, as we're coming to the end of this wonderful podcast with you, is there anything you would like to share with the audience in regards to positive thinking and being able to be happy in your skin?
One interesting feature or bug, depending on how you see it, of your brain is that we used to think in terms of brain regions. This is a region for language. This is a region for tactile stimulation, blah, blah, blah. We now think much more in terms of networks in the brain and parts of the brain that all work together. So we have one network which is very involved when we're feeling distressed, and that's called the default mode network. And our brains default to activity in the default mode network, and it basically ruminates on bad things that happened in the past and projects those into bad things that might happen in the future. And this was absolutely wonderful when we lived in a primal environment in which there were all kinds of threats we had to process from the past and project and plan for the woolly mammoth that might charge at us tomorrow. But for you and me, there's no more woolly mammoth. There's no more of those external threats. But our default mode network, that's the ancient part of our brain, still defaults to rumination about the past and projection of that worry into the future. What it is not is in the present. And so that's in the middle of our brain. It's kind of a mohawk in the center of our brain. We also have a set of regions on the lateral parts of our brain, kind of like a hat band. If you think about it, wearing a hat where your hat band would go around your head, that's not the mohawk, that's the opposite. That's called the task positive network. And that contains all kinds of really useful things we can do. And so we have the ability to shift our brain function from the mohawk to the hat band, from the default mode network to the task positive network. And then when we do that, we're literally changing brain function. Neurons that fire together wire together, and they start wiring together within 12 seconds of holding that positive intention. So we're a positive person over and over and over again, determinedly and regularly. We're then wiring together all kinds of structures in this task positive network. We get happier and happier and happier. In this brain, I ask myself, is there an endpoint beyond which we can't get any happier? And so I found some research into Tibetan monks who have done a huge amount of meditation in their lives. And it turns out that even at 60,000 hours of meditation, they're still getting happier. Their mohawk keeps shrinking, their hat band keeps growing, and they have a whole new brain that functions very differently. So you are rebuilding your brain. You have the option of firing these regions. They're there. We just have to use them. And so part of my passion now is really encouraging people to use that. It's in your head. You can fire that positive network. You can have those positive visualizations. You can tap, meditate, do these positive things for yourself. And your brain is growing. And after a while, it's not just software. It's literally the hardware inside your head. So that's my big message is you have all the stuff inside your head. Go use it and have a fabulous life. And like me, start laughing 300 times a day or more.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm going to show this podcast to my kids, the importance the importance of our emotions. So thank you again. Thank you, Dawson. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And we wish you all the beautiful happiness and days in your life to come.
Oh, and yours. Thanks for sharing this. It's a joy.
Thank you. So yes, thank you everyone for listening. I really enjoyed that talk. I hope you did too. And there will be more of these on the Food Matters podcast. So head to foodmatters.com and see you again.